We're going to spend a little time with Mary Throne, state legislator from District 11, who's now running for governor.
That's right.
Welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good morning.
Mary, let me ask you first of all, the obvious question we've just been talking about, as a matter of fact, comparing states and politics and so forth. Wyoming's pretty red state.
It is.
Is it fair to say it's an uphill climb for any Democrat who wants the governorship?
Well, if you look at history and the year we're in now, you'd say it's an uphill climb for a Republican because it's been 50 years since we elected back-to-back Republican governors, and we've had 4, 5 Democratic governors.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and some surprise withdrawals, at least assumed they were going to be in the race. Surprise withdrawals. So it's a much more open field than probably people anticipate.
no, and with 6 people so far announced on the other side, it's unpredictable. But I'm just going to keep running my race.
Mm-hmm.
I have a 10-year voting record. I have a long history of public service, and I'm just going to keep running my race. And then in August, I'll know who I'm running against. But I just think we really need to go down a different path as a state. We need strong leadership in the governor's office, leadership that really is standing up for Wyoming. Certainly the last 4 years I was in the legislature, I thought we were making exactly the wrong decisions as a state in a downturn. Yeah. And we can't keep doing things the same way that haven't worked in the past. If you look at our history, we've got to try a different approach so the state can not only survive but thrive.
I have mentioned my being from another energy-centric state. And that lesson was learned quite a while back after our last bust down in Texas. You'd better diversify. You'd better get some other industries in here. A little tougher in a less populated state, but is that part of the problem that you see here in Wyoming?
It is part of the problem, and we don't fundamentally change how we approach providing government services, doing what we need to do. We've studied economic diversity in this state since I was a teenager, but we don't implement it. So the last bust that I lived through was in the 90s. It's when I moved back to Wyoming. And I see us making the same mistakes that we made then. In the 90s, we hunkered down and we waited for the next boom. And fortunately, it came. Coal bed methane came along, the natural gas boom came, and everything was peachy. But that was not a good approach. I think we have to build on the wealth we have in our minerals, invest in the state, and keep our energy industry strong. I'm a big supporter of the energy industry. I don't want it to go away.
Well, and no, certainly nobody does, and it's not going to anytime soon. And everybody says diversify the economy, but how do you do it? Isn't that where it always falls short?
Well, if we diversify the economy and we don't broaden the tax base, we don't actually solve the fundamental problem that we have. But first, we have to build on our existing industries, the energy sector, coal, oil, and natural gas, help them survive and thrive, look for value-added opportunities, also for Trona. I don't understand why we don't make glass in Wyoming. We also need to enhance tourism. I don't think we're fully taking advantage of our tourism opportunities. And we have to create communities and opportunities for younger people to stay here or to move back, or new young families to move in. I really think there's not one thing that's going to save us. We have a growing tech sector, that's great, but in our smaller communities we have connectivity issues. So we need to deal with that. I've seen entrepreneurial spirit across the state that we need to nurture and develop and support our local communities so they're nice places to live. Yet in Cheyenne, I see the same old thinking that just doesn't get us ahead.
The session is wrapping up as we do this. They've got a couple of more days, luckily. Your thoughts on the session just ending? It was meant to be a budget session, but I guess, as always, a lot of extraneous stuff kind of got in the way.
It did, and also they didn't deal with our fundamental budget issues in any meaningful way. They just kicked the can down the road. I mean, they fixed it for 2 years, but the major long-term issues are still there, and they didn't do anything that I could see to solve those problems.
Talking to energy folks as we do every week, oil and gas, they're going to come back, probably not to the level that we enjoyed for a while, where I think it was over $100 a barrel.
Right.
It's going to settle in the $60 to $70 range, and oil producers can make money with that. They've gotten much more efficient. But those kind of good old days aren't going to come back, probably. And coal's market is going to diminish as the years go on. So where do we turn?
No, and I think the economics, if you talk to any economist, our UW economists or any energy economists, they'll tell you that the markets for all three of those, coal, oil, and natural gas, have fundamentally changed. So I think if we accept that, then the first thing any doctor does is diagnose the problem, or you have to identify the problem, and that's our fundamental problem. So we have to, again, I think, take a community by community approach, look for opportunities where they are. We also have to, as a state, have an honest discussion with ourselves about what we want government to do and what existing revenue we have to pay for it. We don't have that discussion because I think the legislature plays hide the ball. They don't really tell anybody what's going on with the budget. They say they're not spending money, yet everybody spends money on their little pet project. And they cut things that end up costing us money down the road, and then they figure out, oh, well, that was a mistake. But then they already wasted some money. And so I think the first thing is a governor's got to do is run the state well, which will create a climate that's good for business. Right now, if I were a business, I'd be worried about moving here because things are too uncertain.
Actually, I know there was one survey that we did a story on that recently ranked Wyoming's education system fairly high in the nation. It was very seventh in the nation. And if you're going to maintain that, it's going to take money. If you're going to maintain the roads, it's going to take money. Highway patrol cars break down. They have to be replaced. People need raises. Nothing, frankly, gets cheaper. At a certain point, are they going to have to bite the bullet and look for extra revenue?
I think we do have to look for extra revenue. I pride myself on being straightforward. But before we get to that point, you first have to really explain to the public what you're doing, because they don't do that now. It's just all way too complicated. But basically, you start with the simple question: what do we want government to do? And then what are our existing resources? For example, we have an income stream from the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund that we don't take full advantage of. We could probably increase the amount we take and guarantee it, which would throw another $100 million into the mix on an annual basis. I'm just talking big numbers here, rough numbers. So before we get to where do we go for new revenues, we have to figure out what we have and be honest with people about it.
Which is difficult for folks that want to get reelected.
It is. But again...
wasn't that some of what Governor Meade was talking about before the session began? We're going to have to face facts here, folks. And
I've heard him say that. But where I think I bring something different to the table than, frankly, any candidate in the race is I understand the legislature. I understand how you have to work with everybody, and I have a 10-year record of doing it. I worked with a lot of my colleagues on a wide variety of issues of all different ideological persuasions just to get things done. So I think you have to start that discussion sooner. I mean, I think as governor, I would probably go around the state and do town halls and just with, you know, simple charts. This is what we have. This is what we need. What do you think?
For a red state as bipartisan as Wyoming has been, it must be said, though, the partisan lines have gotten deeper over the last few years, and more acrimonious. Let's be honest.
I think that's a fair statement, and a situation I don't like. Not because it makes running harder, but I think it's a disservice to the public and to the voters. Wyoming worked a lot better when we parked our partisanship at the door, when we walked in the door of the Capitol, and we just rolled up our sleeves and we got to work. And it was that way when I started in the legislature. This extreme partisanship and frankly just flat out nastiness is a relatively recent development in Wyoming. And I think that was another reason I wanted to run. I want to get Wyoming back to where it was, because I think that's where you get the best solutions for the public.
They used to say in city elections, certainly, and I think you could apply it to a state election, potholes don't have a party label. The garbage doesn't have a party label. It has to be taken care of. You could say that about the prisons, the college, the education system, law enforcement, you name it.
Right. Fire and police. Yeah, exactly. And you know, however you feel about, I don't know, religion in schools or some of the more hot button issues, those fundamental issues, you're right, they're nonpartisan. And certainly when I was in the legislature, I always enjoyed working on issues with the local government officials, the county commissioners, the cities and towns, because they didn't have the luxury of wasting time. You know, they had to get the streets plowed. And they had to take care of the courthouse.
That's where the rubber meets the road, but you have to get the snow out of the way first.
Yeah, exactly.
For that to happen. Mary Throne, we're almost out of time. Let me leave the last part of this to you. What would you like to say to the voters in terms of when they look at the cast of characters running for governor in this next go-around?
Well, I think that I'm the most experienced candidate, and I am committed to putting Wyoming first. And I feel so strongly that today's problems deserve something so much better than yesterday's thinking. And we have so many opportunities as a state, and we need leaders who will take advantage of them.
Okay, Mary Throne, thank you so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Roger. This was great.
Okay.